The moment I found the photos. Him laughing on a yacht, arm around her, while Margaret's monitors flatlined in the next room. I didn't cry, I smiled, because that's when I knew revenge isn't loud, it's patient. And I had just inherited everything he thought was his. I stood by the rain-streaked window of our small apartment, watching the New York City lights blur like far-off stars. Below on the wet street, Adrian was loading his last suitcase into the yellow taxi. In the bedroom behind me, his mother, my mother-in-law Margaret, lay fragile under the sheets, her breathing shallow and laboured, the sound of it mixing with the steady beep of the oxygen monitor. Terminal. That word had become part of our vocabulary these last few months. Adrian had been the one who insisted we bring her home from the hospital. Team family takes care of family, he'd said, flashing that smooth, practiced smile of his, the one that used to make me feel safe. But now the taxi door slammed shut, and he was gone. Off to Germany for some urgent business trip, he claimed. Just like that. Leaving me alone with the IV drips, the pill bottles lined up on the nightstand, and the endless quiet that followed every time the front door closed behind him. "I'm counting on you, Lena," he'd whispered right before he left, pressing a quick kiss to my forehead like it was a signature on a contract. Then he was gone, swallowed by the night and the taillights of the cab. I didn't cry, not then. I just stood there, arms folded tight across my chest, feeling the weight settle in. The money was already running thin. His wire transfers came irregularly, always less than promised, and always with some excuse about cash flow issues. Margaret needed round-the-clock care, and I was the only one left to give it. My job at the little publishing house downtown had become something I squeezed into the cracks between hospital runs, med schedules, and trying to get her to eat even one more spoonful of soup. I used to be someone else, someone who laughed easily at author readings, who stayed late arguing over comma placement with writers who cared too much about their words. Now my world had shrunk to these four walls, the smell of antiseptic, and the soft rattle in Margaret's chest every time she tried to speak. I still believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to believe him. Love, or whatever version of it I was clinging to, has a way of making you swallow the things you know aren't right. So I stayed. I endured. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd come back changed, grateful, ready to carry some of the load. But deep down, even then, I felt the trap closing around me. The bills piling up, the dying woman I was now responsible for, and the invisible chains of duty and devotion that kept me exactly where he wanted me, holding everything together while he walked away. Weeks blurred into months, and our apartment started to smell like a hospital ward. Antiseptic, stale sheets, and something heavier I could only call regret. Every day felt the same. I'd drag myself out of bed before dawn, throw on whatever wasn't wrinkled, and rush to the subway for my editing job downtown. By late afternoon, I'd be racing back home through the crowded streets, picking up whatever groceries I could afford, and then stepping through the door to the familiar hum of machines and the soft rasp of Margaret's breathing. I'd change the sweat-soaked sheets while she watched me with those sharp eyes of hers, eyes that pain hadn't dulled. I'd measure out her meds, coax her to swallow a few bites of bland soup or mashed potatoes, wipe her forehead with a cool cloth. She didn't say much anymore, but she didn't need to. That gaze followed me everywhere. Part gratitude, part quiet judgment, maybe even a flicker of pity. It made the room feel smaller. Adrian's wire transfers showed up like clockwork, except they weren't. Sometimes a few $100s, sometimes nothing for weeks. The emails that came with them were always short. Business is tough right now. Tight cash flow. Hang in there. I stared at my phone screen too long each time, and trying to read between the lines, but the words stayed cold and evasive. My world shrank to these four walls. Friends stopped texting after I cancelled one too many plans. Invitations dried up. I told myself it was fine. I was too tired to go out anyway. Exhaustion settled into my bones like damp cold, the kind New York winters leave behind even in summer. But strangely, Margaret's silent company became a kind of anchor. She was there, breathing, watching, existing with me in the quiet. It wasn't much, but it kept me from completely unraveling. That's when I started noticing the little things. His calls got shorter, 5 minutes, then 3, then gotta run, meeting. His excuses grew thinner, like paper wearing through at the creases. The man who'd promised family takes care of family was fading. I replaced by someone I barely recognized. The cracks in his story appeared slowly at first, faint as footprints in fresh snow. But once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. And somewhere deep inside, under all the fatigue, a small, stubborn part of me began to wonder just how long I was supposed to keep holding everything together alone. It was one of those nights when sleep refused to come. Margaret had finally drifted off under the low, steady hum of the oxygen machine, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. I sat on the edge of the couch in the dim living room, phone in hand, scrolling mindlessly through Instagram the way people do when they're too tired to do anything else, but too wired to close their eyes. That's when I saw it. A mutual friend, someone from Adrian's old college crowd, had posted a carousel of photos from a beachside cocktail party in Miami. Palm trees strung with lights, golden hour glow, everyone dressed in white linen like they'd stepped out of a catalogue. I almost scrolled past. Then something in the background stopped me cold. Adrian, tanned darker than I'd ever seen him, head thrown back in laughter, arms slung casually around the shoulders of a woman with auburn hair and a smile that looked expensive. Clara Reed, his colleague, the one he'd mentioned in passing a dozen times, always with that easy, dismissive tone. The caption read something breezy, "Paradise found," and the tags confirmed every detail. South Beach, yacht club, the whole glossy scene. Not Berlin, not Munich, Miami. Sun-drenched, champagne-soaked Miami. My thumb froze over the screen. I zoomed in. There he was again, sunglasses perched on his head, drink in hand, looking like a man who didn't have a single care in the world. While here, in our dim apartment that smelled like bleach and illness, Margaret's skin looked almost translucent against the starched hospital sheets I'd changed that morning. The contrast burned behind my eyes. I felt it hit me like a wave, cold, then hot, then numb. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Betrayal isn't just a word, it's physical. It sits in your stomach like lead, then climbs up your throat and makes it hard to breathe. I stared at that photo until the screen timed out and went black. Then I opened it again and again. No sobbing, no dramatic collapse. Just this quiet, terrible clarity settling over me like fog lifting. He wasn't in Germany. He hadn't been for who knows how long. While I counted out morphine drops and wiped fever sweat from his mother's forehead, he was sipping cocktails on a yacht with another woman. I deleted the app, not in anger, at least not the explosive kind. I deleted it the way you close a door you're never going to open again. Calm, deliberate. Something inside me shifted. The part of me that had been waiting, hoping, making excuses. It went quiet. In its place came something sharper, colder, more awake. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to think. And whatever came next, it wasn't going to be me staying small so he could keep living large. The game had just changed, and this time I wasn't playing defense. The end came quietly, in the way winter mornings in New York sometimes do, grey light creeping through the blinds, everything still except the slow, uneven rattle in Margaret's chest. I'd barely slept again, just dozed in the armchair beside her bed with one hand wrapped around hers. Her fingers were cool and thin, like dry leaves, but she held on with a grip that surprised me every time. Around 4 in the morning, the breaths changed, shorter, more laboured, each one pulling harder than the last. The monitors started their warning beeps, soft at first, then insistent. I didn't call the ambulance. We'd talked about this weeks ago, in one of the rare moments when she could still speak clearly. No heroics, no machines breathing for her when her body was ready to stop. Just let it happen. I sat on the edge of the bed and took both her hands in mine. She opened her eyes, really opened them, for the first time in days. They were sharp again, the same fierce blue they'd been when I first met her, back when she still thought I might be good enough for her son. She tried to speak, but it came out as air more than sound. I leaned closer. "Go back." Her voice was barely a thread. "To the old house, upstate, the one on the lake." I nodded, throat tight. "Cellar," she managed. "Under the salt jar, the big one. Dig." Her eyes locked on mine, steady, almost pleading. "For you, child," she whispered, "not him." Then she closed her eyes again, and the room filled with the long silence that follows when someone stops fighting. The monitors flatlined one after another, a flat tone cutting through the dawn like a line drawn in pencil. I stayed there holding her hand until the light turned pale gold, and the city outside started to wake up. I didn't cry right away. I just sat with the weight of her last words settling into me, like stones in deep water. The funeral was small. A handful of neighbours, an old cousin who flew in from Ohio, the minister from the church she hadn't attended in years. Adrian didn't come. "Flight's delayed," his text said. "Weather in Europe." I didn't bother replying. I stood by the grave in the cold March wind, watching the dirt fall in soft clumps, and felt something shift inside me. Not grief exactly, but recognition. Margaret had known. She'd known for a long time. Every time she'd watched me from that hospital bed, every time she'd stayed silent while Adrian's excuses piled up like unpaid bills, she'd been waiting, protecting something. Protecting me. Her silence hadn't been weakness, it had been a shield. And those last words, they were a weapon handed straight to me. I walked away from the cemetery with her voice still echoing in my head. "For you, child, not him." Somewhere under the floor of an old cellar 2 hours north of the city, there was a truth buried. And Margaret had just given me the map. I wasn't going to wait for anyone else to dig it up. I drove upstate alone on a Saturday morning when the sky looked like it was about to split open. The old house sat at the end of a gravel road that hadn't seen a plough in years, peeling white paint, porch sagging under a blanket of weeds, windows dark like closed eyes. It had been Margaret's childhood home, the one she and her husband had kept as a weekend escape before Adrian came along. I hadn't been back since the early days of our marriage, when everything still felt possible. I parked the rental car, grabbed the shovel I'd bought at a hardware store in the next town over, and walked around to the side door. The key was still under the loose brick where Margaret had always hidden it. Inside smelled of dust and mildew and time. I didn't linger upstairs. I went straight down to the cellar. The stairs creaked under my weight. A single bare bulb flickered when I pulled the chain. In the far corner, just like she'd said, stood the big ceramic salt jar. Cracked glaze, heavy lid, the kind people used to keep in root cellars 100 years ago. I set the shovel down and pushed the jar aside. The floorboards underneath were loose. I pried them up with the edge of the blade until I could see the dirt below. I started digging. It didn't take long. Maybe 20 minutes of steady work before the shovel hit something solid. I dropped to my knees and brushed the soil away with my hands. A small metal box, rusted at the edges but still sealed tight. I carried it upstairs to the kitchen table, wiped it clean with my sleeve, and opened the latch. Inside, a savings passbook showing $150,000, deposited over years in small, careful amounts. A set of yellowed adoption papers with Adrian's name and a date from 35 years ago, and a single sheet of lined paper folded once, written in Margaret's neat, slanted handwriting. I read it sitting on the cold linoleum floor. Adrian was never ours by blood. We took him in as a baby because we couldn't have children of our own. We loved him fiercely, or at least we tried. But some hearts come poisoned from the start. See, he's shown me who he really is time and again. This money, this house, everything we built, it's not for him. It's for the daughter I never had by birth. You, Lena, you've been the one who stayed, the one who cared. Take it, use it, live the life he tried to steal from you. My hands were shaking when I finished, not from the cold, from the weight of it all crashing down at once. Adrian, the golden boy, the charming son everyone adored, wasn't even hers, not really. And Margaret had known it. She'd watched him turn cold and selfish and hadn't said a word until the very end, when she could hand the truth to someone who'd earned it. I sat there a long time, the box open in front of me, rain starting to tap against the windows. The inheritance wasn't about blood, it was about loyalty, about who showed up when it mattered. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something stronger than anger or grief. Power. Real power. The kind that comes when the choices finally belong to you. Revenge or release? I closed the box and carried it to the car. I'd decide on the drive back to the city. Back in the apartment, everything looked the same. The faded couch, the pill bottles still lined up on the counter like soldiers. But nothing felt the same. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and composed the email in under 5 minutes. No drama, no accusations, just the facts, delivered clean. Adrian, your mother passed. She left an inheritance. It's substantial. You should come home to claim it. Lena. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. He replied within the hour. On my way, booking the next flight. So sorry about Mom. I will talk when I get there. No questions, no how are you, just the hook set deep. 3 days later, he walked through the door like nothing had changed. Same tailored coat, same easy smile, same way of filling the room with his presence. He pulled me into a hug that lasted exactly long enough to feel rehearsed. Lena, I'm so sorry I couldn't make the funeral. Flights were a nightmare. Weather delays in Frankfurt. The lie slid out smooth as ever. I nodded, stepped back, let him settle onto the couch like he still belonged there. He didn't waste time. After the bare minimum condolences, she was a tough old bird, wasn't she? He leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes bright. So, the inheritance, how much are we talking? There it was, the greed flickering behind the charm like a bad light bulb. I stayed calm. I'd rehearsed this part in my head the whole drive back from upstate. It's enough to change things, I said. But there are papers to sign, details to go over. His leg started bouncing. Ballpark? I named a number just high enough to make his pupils dilate. Low 7 figures, once everything's liquidated. He exhaled through his nose, trying to play it cool. Failed. I watched him pace the living room after that, asking questions faster than I could answer. When can we access it? Is it in cash, stocks, property? Did she leave anything specific for me? Every word he said peeled back another layer of the mask. Ungrateful, cold. The man who'd left his dying mother for a beach vacation, now salivating over money he hadn't earned and didn't deserve. I let him talk, let him squirm, let him think he was still in control. For the first time since I'd met him, I was the one pulling the strings. I dangled the promise of wealth like bait on a hook, and he swallowed it whole. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for him to step fully inside. I met Adrian at Harold Klein's office on a Tuesday afternoon in Midtown. The place looked exactly like what it was. A mid-tier law firm trying to look expensive. Chrome and glass reception desk, fake plants, the faint smell of burnt coffee and toner. Harold Klein was Adrian's lawyer, the one he'd used for years on business matters. I'd never liked the man, too slick, too quick with the handshake, eyes that never quite met yours. But today I needed him on my side, or at least neutral. I walked in carrying a slim folder. Adrian was already there, sitting across from Klein in one of the leather chairs, in legs crossed like he owned the place. He gave me that half smile he used when he thought he was winning. "Lena," he said, standing just long enough to make it look polite, "you look good." I didn't return the compliment. I sat down, placed the folder on the table, and slid the divorce papers across to him. "Here's the deal," I said, voice steady. "You sign these today. I take full responsibility for the medical debts. All of them. Hospital, hospice, everything. You walk away clean. No alimony, no claims on the estate, nothing. You're free." He blinked, looked at the papers, then at me, then at Klein. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it." Klein cleared his throat. "She's offering to absorb significant liability in exchange for a clean, uncontested dissolution. It's generous." Adrian's eyes narrowed, but I could see the calculation running behind them. The inheritance I dangled was still glittering in his mind. 7 figures, maybe more, once the house and accounts were liquidated. He thought he was about to cash in big. Why fight over a few hospital bills when a fortune was waiting? He hesitated for maybe 10 seconds. Then he picked up the pen. The scratch of it on paper was the loudest sound in the room. When he finished, he pushed the stack back toward me with a small, satisfied nod. "Done? We good?" I took the signed papers without looking at him. "We're good." He stood up, buttoned his coat, flashed that same polished smile. "Tell my accountant to expect the transfer details soon." I didn't answer. I just watched him walk out, shoulders relaxed, stride easy, like a man who'd just closed the best deal of his life. He had no idea he'd just signed away everything that mattered. The psychological hit landed harder than I expected. Not on him, on me. Walking out of that office with those papers in my bag felt like someone had cut a rope that had been tied around my chest for years. I could finally breathe full, deep breaths. The divorce wasn't just paperwork, it was oxygen, liberation. Adrian thought he'd won. He thought he'd walked away with his freedom and a fat payday coming. Instead, he'd inked his own downfall with his own hand. Freedom tasted sharp, like the first cold sip of water after too long in the desert, and sweet. God, it was sweet. Clara Reed wasn't hard to track down. A few targeted searches on Instagram and LinkedIn, a couple of tagged photos from that Miami trip, and her profile popped right up, public, polished, full of beach selfies and living my best life captions. I sent her a direct message, short, no accusations, just, "We need to talk about Adrian. Coffee? My treat." She agreed faster than I expected. We met at a quiet cafe in the West Village on a rainy Thursday. Dim lights, mismatched chairs, the kind of place where people go when they don't want to be overheard. She showed up in oversized sunglasses and a trench coat, even though it was barely drizzling. Classic New York armor. She slid into the booth across from me, ordered black coffee, no sugar, and got straight to it. "I figured this was coming," she said, voice low. "He's been acting cagey, mentioned some big inheritance, said you were handling it." I didn't react, just waited. Then she started talking. Now, she told me about the embezzlement first, how he'd been skimming from client accounts at his firm for over a year, small amounts at first, then bigger. Gambling debts piling up in Atlantic City and online sportsbooks. How he'd bragged to her about fixing Margaret's will before she died, forging a new one that named him sole beneficiary, just in case the original didn't go his way. "He promised me the world," she said, sneering at her own words. "Trips, an apartment in Tribeca, the whole fantasy. But I'm not stupid. I started keeping records the minute I smelled the bullshit." She opened her phone and slid it across the table. emails, bank statements, screenshots of texts where he bragged about the forged documents, photos of him at casinos, time-stamped while Margaret was still in hospice, and proof he'd been wiring money to offshore accounts. "He thought I was just arm candy," she said, voice bitter. "But I've got my own plans, and I'm not going down with him." She emailed the whole folder to me right there at the table. "Take him down," she said, standing up. "I don't want anything from him anymore. I just want him gone." I watched her leave, coat flapping behind her like she was shedding something heavy. Clara wasn't a hero. She was ambitious, ruthless, and probably just as self-serving as he was. But in that moment, her greed turned against him. She became the unwitting ally I hadn't even asked for. The evidence she handed me was ironclad. Emails, transfers, timestamps, everything the authorities would need to build a case for fraud, embezzlement, forgery. A noose slowly tightening around Adrian's neck. And greed had devoured him from the inside, and now it was starting to devour itself. It was 4 days after he signed the divorce papers when Adrian came back. I heard the key in the lock, still his key, because I hadn't bothered to change it yet. And then the door flew open so hard it banged against the wall. He stormed in, coat still on, face red and twisted like someone had just told him the world wasn't his playground anymore. "Where the hell is the money, Lena?" His voice cracked on the last word. "You said inheritance, substantial, low 7 figures. You lied to me." I was standing in the kitchen, arms folded, waiting. I didn't flinch. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head too many times to count. He paced toward me, pointing. "You think you can just screw me over after everything? I'm still your husband on paper until those papers are filed, and I want what's mine." I reached behind me, picked up the metal box from the counter, and set it down between us with a soft thud. "Here," I said. "Everything you came for." He froze for a second, eyes darting to the box like it was a winning lottery ticket. Then he lunged forward, flipping the lid open. The adoption papers were on top. He snatched them up, scanned the first page, and his face went from angry to blank to something close to panic. "What? What is this?" I didn't answer right away. I just watched. He kept reading, flipping to the will Margaret had hidden, the one that named me sole heir to the house, the accounts, the Manhattan apartment she'd never told him about, the little bookstore downtown she'd quietly bought years ago as a retirement dream. And then he got to Clara's folder. Printed emails, bank statements showing the embezzlement, screenshots of casino withdrawals, the forged will he'd tried to slip in before Margaret died. His hands started shaking. The papers slipped to the floor one by one. "You—" He looked up at me, eyes wild. "You set me up." "No," I said, voice low and even. "You set yourself up. I just stopped pretending." He took a step toward me, fists clenched. "You bitch! You think you can take everything? I'll ruin you. That's when I lifted my phone so he could see the screen. 911 already dialed, speaker on. The dispatcher's calm voice asking, "Mum, officers are en route. Stay on the line." He stopped cold. I met his eyes. "You're done, Adrian." He tried one more threat. Something about lawyers, about how he'd fight this, and how I'd regret it. But the words came out weak, crumbling at the edges. Then he looked around like he was seeing the apartment for the first time. The faded couch where he used to sprawl while I cleaned up after Margaret, the empty pill bottles still on the counter, the quiet that used to feel suffocating but now felt like peace. He sank to his knees. Not dramatically, just collapsed, head in his hands. "Please," he whispered. "Lena, don't do this. We can fix it. I'll change. I swear." I didn't move, didn't speak. I just stood there and let him beg. The man who'd left me to watch his mother die alone while he sipped cocktails on a yacht was now on the floor of the apartment he'd abandoned, pleading for mercy he'd never once shown. Sirens grew louder outside, close now. I looked down at him one last time, and the power had flipped so completely it almost felt surreal. He'd spent years orchestrating my misery, making me small so he could stay big. And in the end, all it took was the truth. Margaret's truth, Clara's evidence, my refusal to keep carrying his lies. He wasn't the golden son anymore. He wasn't the charming husband. He was just a man who'd finally run out of masks. And I was the one still standing, the survivor,